and I'm going to start it off. So today, the topic, and I think I did get to select this one out of a group of them, and it's an important one for a number of reasons, and you'll see why as we work our way through. If you do have questions, like Nick said, please put them in there, and I definitely will address them. So the goal here is to address, determining where your sensitive data resides. And this is what was posted from ISACA on the presentation, right? So we're going to discuss the crucial controls and the policies that organizations need to establish to understand where their data resides, as well as classification of that data, and then other implications regarding to things like privacy and other regulations and other standards and laws that pertain to the various industries. And this is a fun one, because when I look at the agenda that we're going to cover a bunch of different areas, and it starts with knowing your business. And at first blush, people are like, what do you mean knowing? Of course, we know our business. And when we dig into it, you're going to see, there's a lot of other facets of that than just like, oh yeah, I know what we do for a living in terms of our deliverable, but the underneath that, what makes it tick, and the aspects of that are critical to not only the survival and sustenance of your business, but moving forward with regards to changing regulations and laws that come out in response to the ever-changing threat landscape. So that's a big one. Tools, right? There's a lot of different tools that are out there. Some are manual, some are automated. So how can we use those to help us get our arms around everything? And then the third area what we covered is one I call, there's a target on your back, and we're going to talk about the different kinds of sensitive data in the different industries that you folks may all be from different industries or some from others, but we Compass, we work in all industries, and I'll give you some real life examples. I always think those resonate well, and I think they'll serve this purpose today as well. And talk the talk. Well, there's terminology. And I came from the banking industry many years ago, and we still do a lot of IT audit work and security work for banks and credit unions. And there's a terminology, not just in their world, but they're very specific about things like what is a control versus a risk versus a mitigation and things. This is a little bit of terminology, but it does matter, because as we move into the next area of policies, when people go, oh, what's in a policy, and people have different various ideas of what belongs in a policy. And I'll give you examples of what is required, right? And there are different variations, but there's some fundamental things that really must be in a policy, and I'll show you why. Then we move down to the next area where we'll cover several critical policies. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. I'm grabbing the top handful of policies that definitely are quite applicable when you talk about governing sensitive data within your organization at rest and in motion. And there's a fair amount to that. So this is not intended to be a complete list. And I gladly can entertain discussions surrounding other policies, how they pertain, the do's and don'ts for sure. And then lastly, I'll summarize a lot of the key points and hopefully bring that home to you. And again, please, I love to have the questions. We have some other ones, some canned ones. If people don't have questions, I can certainly field those, but I'd love to get some real ones from the group. All right, so knowing your business. Basically, what does your business do? So in any industry, well, let's say I came from banking. Let's talk about that. So maybe in my business, I'm like banking. If I'm a bank, I serve customers. If I'm a credit union, I serve members. But what kind of information, what kind of sensitive data? Because we have lots of data. So I was specific about talking about some of this sensitive data that we store or transmit or process, because those are the three really phases of data, right? So data that I might store in a system or a database for later, right? Reference information, like in the banking world, as an example, I have a customer or member's account number. And I have next to that how much money they have, their social security number, means to which I can identify that customer or member, to be able to do commerce with them. So that's important, right? It's an important part of your business. So knowing, what your business does is important, and getting a sense for just kind of walking through what kind of data you have. And I'll tell you what, if you do it thoroughly and you include all facets of your business, all the verticals, you'll start to see different areas pop up that are eye-opening. And even in the banking world that I came from, you'll see times when we have dialogue with our clients, and all of a sudden you realize marketing is dealing with some other information, like, oh, we're sending out mailers to new members or to new customers, and that has a name and an address and an email, different information. And more and more as this world is becoming really under attack from a cyber perspective, information is as innocuous as a name and address together has now been associated with considering it as borderline confidential. So it really is it's eye-opening as you walk your way through. So keep an eye on that and kind of talk it through to find out, make sure we uncover all of it. When in doubt, why not protect it? I mean, is there a downside to that if you've got the means in place already for the definite confidential information? So knowing what that is, and then where's my sensitive data at rest and emotion? I mentioned that. So knowing what kind of data I have and then where it is. That's key. So I know I have this stuff throughout my business, but where does it sit? Why is it there? Where does it, where is it when it moves through system to system and maybe exits the facility? We care a lot about that, so knowing about where that sensitive data is critical. And one key point, it's funny because when we get brought into work with different businesses, for example, I have clients that are like, hey, I need you to build a security policy set. We got an audit coming up and I need these policies in place and right? Well, that's great. And that directive is very clear, except I really need to start with, where's your data, right? We need to know where it is. We need to get our arms around it. How can I protect something? Because that's really what your policy set's for, is to protect that confidential information that you're entrusted with, typically within your business at rest and in motion for the customers or consumers that you serve. So it's analogous to when I get brought in to do a business continuity plan, and the client's like, well, I have to get this plan ready for examiners or for auditors. And it's like, well, we have to go through a business impact analysis. And they're like, oh no, we don't have time for that. No, you don't have time not to. A business impact analysis in that example is where you uncover or determine the most critical functions in your business. And now I can build plans around them, just like that with policies that need to be put in place and protection and controls to be put in place to protect your sensitive data. We need to know where it is first. And then moving through the life cycle of it, right? So how long does it need to be in your business? Where is it and how does it flow through your systems? And when is the end of it, right? When do we get rid of it? Because you do have to adhere to certain laws at a federal and state level. There are also policies that you have already potentially in place. You may be working in an industry that you have contracts in place with your vendors or customers that you serve, where you may retain their data, but they may say, hey, after 3 years, I want to delete it, So there's a lot of that, but also with the really push of a good push, but a push nonetheless in the way of privacy. We're seeing that a lot where consumers, thankfully, we consumers, we're not only business folks, but we're consumers as well. And we have rights when we embark in business with a provider to serve us. When we put our private information up there, we have certain rights about that and the privacy of that information, to the point where we can say, you know what, we're done doing business with you, and we want that information of mine removed. We don't want it shared either. We don't want you sharing with other people either. A lot of businesses got into that way back when. It's like, hey, I can sell this information. I can share this information to make money myself, and that put the consumer in a bad place. So we have rights, and there are laws, privacy laws in every state. There are also international laws like GDPR that protect consumer information. So it's very important. And the last part of it, knowing who governs your business, right? So regardless of the industry, I talked about banking, well, the FFIEC and the FDIC specifically under that umbrella governs the FDI, the banks, and then the NCUA governs credit unions. But pick an industry, and a lot of them jump right out at you. But there are multiple. It's not just one that you answer to. There's federal laws for privacy and state laws for privacy, but also again some other laws depending on your industry that you need to adhere to. So there's a lot of things to consider. So knowing your business isn't always as easy as it first sounds. Good news is there are tools that can help. And I should just say really tools and techniques, because not everything is an automated tool per se out of the box. And one of the key ones, the first bullet here, really kind of says that, right? It's like there are manual governance controls like procurement and SDLC, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So procurement policy, we got brought into University in the state of Connecticut, wonderful organization, and we got in there, and there was information everywhere. And it wasn't even that folks were trying to do something nefarious, right? They were just all trying to do their job and do the best they could. But all of a sudden, we had situations where these SVPs or VPs had purchase power, and they were acquiring systems to store information. This was a university, so it was student information, student healthcare information, and they were popping up all over campus. And it was like, holy cow, how are we going to get our arms around a governance for this university without having a governor on it? And that is the purchasing stops with your CFO typically, right? So a good procurement policy about purchases and stopping it right there. So at least we know we can stop sort of the spread of information popping up throughout the campus. Because how can we control it if we don't know where the heck it is? So that's important to have a good sort of, and whether you call it a procurement policy, some folks under, and that's why I included the software or system development lifecycle policy or plan, because within that also a lot of organizations are like, okay, let's see, we have a business need. So for a system to do whatever for the customers we serve, but you always go, hey, do I buy it or do I build it? Well, if I'm going to buy it, based on certain criteria, you may acquire through that process a system to store information. So those policies, overlap a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's really a way, along with other sort of policies to govern, hey, purchases here have to have some kind of rules governing it to kind of just so they can't willy-nilly pop up everywhere, and certain information as well. But there's another myriad of policies that we're going to talk about a little bit later that help the effort as well. This one example, I sort of mentioned it a little bit with the university example I gave, but basically it was, this particular client had 3 Oracle databases. Forget the cost of Oracle. If any of you are involved and deal with databases and such, it's a great tool, expensive. Why am I going to have 3 licenses? Because I didn't know what the other side of the campus was doing. And not only were they doing that, they had that up there, but the only time IT found out about it was when they had an issue. And then they call IT and they're saying, what? I didn't know we even had an Oracle instance over here. What's on there? Oh my gosh, they've got student information. They're doing, sending out whatever their effort was. But some of the information was like, holy cow, this needs to be protected. We need to have, encryption on this database for certain facets or records within it to protect the university and the students that you're serving. It's just an example. There's so many like that, sadly. But as you move through, thankfully, it's not all manual. We've got some great tools. DLP here, data leakage protection, or there's other kind of tools, but at the end of the day, it's a tool that you run. It scans your network, all attached devices, and they're awesome. They're somewhat pricey, but they are worth their weight in gold, especially if you have a large organization. Any devices that connect to your network automatically are scanned, and it will search for whatever you're looking for. You can set it up to search for any confidential information. And this is probably a good point to mention. Confidential information, like I touched on earlier, was, like information, the easy definition I always use is information that you can't legally obtain sort of over the internet or otherwise, because you can get a lot of stuff illegally. But at the end of the day, it's kind of that, social security number, bank information, stuff that's you don't want out there. It's kind of confidential information. That's the stuff we're referring to. So that these tools find it. They have automated ways of once they identify it, they'll quarantine it, which is great. It doesn't delete it, quarantines it, so it can't be acted upon. They create great reports, and we have some nice procedures that we built for some clients that help them to, once they have it, it's like, okay, you guys have 30 days to clean it up, and then otherwise the system will archive it off or delete it depending on what your business decision is. But it's a nice automated way to really get your arms around it. And then as you move forward with, the last item here, none of this can be successful. The term we used to use in the banking world was tone at the top. It really still holds water in any industry, whether it's a board of directors that governs you or an executive group, some senior management group. But if you don't have the buy-in of management, how can you really get any of these initiatives off the ground and enforced? It's very, very difficult.
Jerry, I have a first question for you.
Yes.
And it kind of goes hand in hand with that last point you made about upper management. How do you handle training employees on understanding where different types of data are kept, how to access them, and when to use which? And how do you decide who should receive the training?
Yeah, so there's a lot with that, but I'll tell you what, first of all, number one, it's great because people say like this, thank you, by the way, whoever asked that. First things first, when we talk about training, it's a requirement, but it's also, even if it wasn't, security awareness training is huge. And I recommend that we fold into training based on the industry. We don't just do canned training for our clients, we customize it. And the reason why we do is for this reason, Nick, and whoever asked the question, is to identify in their industry where their data is and specifically train to the protection of it. The rule that auditors use, and IT auditors and security professionals are no different, is the rule of least privileges. If I do not have a business reason to have access to a physical location where confidential information is, or to a logical location, whether it's a server or PC or whatever, wherever that data resides. If I don't have a business reason to act upon it, I shouldn't have it. I don't care if you're the CEO. If you do not, as part of your job, have a business reason to see it, you should not see it. You should not want to see it. If something goes sideways, and they print out the list of who has access to it, it's like, hey, I'm not on that list. Don't look over here. I mean, you shouldn't want it anyway. But anyway, so that's sort of the way you identify who should have access to it and how to kind of get your arms around the governance of it. Was there more to that question, Nick?
No, I think that was about it. And I want to remind everybody too, feel free to pose these questions, whenever they come to your mind. You don't have to wait till the end. We'll interrupt Jerry. I know he can sometimes speak a little fast, but we will find a way to interrupt him and get those questions in there.
Yeah, I'll also pause at the end of each slide to definitely entertain questions. But I also, last statement on employees. Employees can be your weakest link if you don't train them properly, but you can make them your strongest. Because here's the deal: you can put a lot of money into technology, the best firewall and multiple layers of security and that's wonderful. But at the end of the day, people are involved in our businesses. And that's a good thing if you train them properly. It's a bad thing if you don't, because they can undermine all that security by clicking on links and doing things that would undermine your security posture. Whereas if you train them, contrast to that, if you train them properly and teach them that this doesn't look right to say something, if a person's walking down the halls of your organization, you don't recognize them, stop them, ask them how you can help them, and escort them to where they need to go to make sure that there's no underlying negative intentions there. So just take it the right way.
I have another question for you, actually.
Yep.
How much are companies generally spending these days on DLP tools? Are there other tools that augment it? For example, at the network layer?
Yeah, there are a variety of tools, and there's Identity Finder is one that comes to mind. There's Spirion has a great tool. There are a number of them, and we don't endorse any particular product other than to say, do your homework and ask for references for sure, but they are really, really good. And at the network layer for sure. So it will scan the network. If you open it up completely and look for every kind of confidential information, these scans will run forever. Whereas you can do targeted scans for, like, I'm looking for payment cards. So we're qualified security assessors for PCI, for example. So I may go out and scan just for PCI information. So I'm looking for credit card numbers and information that looks like 16 or 20 digits long. And it checks, some of them will do a LUN check, which is a check, base 10 check to make sure it's a true potential number. So I would say the answer is do your homework. And I can definitely follow up with whoever had that question and give you a few more references of some that I've seen my clients use, and they are wonderful. They do the quarantining, and they also can tie to your data classification policy. So literally it identifies certain systems and it can classify them, based on what you set up with your written policy. For example, public facing systems. Oh, this is public information. And this is probably a good point. I'll cheat, maybe steal some of my own thunder, but there's 4 levels typically in a data classification policy. The first one's public. That's marketing stuff. That's website stuff. That's things you want the world to see. Then there's internal. Maybe it's an email to a colleague. It's not horrible because we have good policies that say don't put confidential information in an email, but I might correspond with a colleague and it probably wasn't intended for the outside world. So it's kind of not but it's not confidential. So that's the next level. The big band that we're talking about here really is that next level up, the third level. And that's the confidential, the social security number, the bank information, that kind of content. And then we'll have a 4th level, and that's restricted. And what's restricted? It's like even the folks in the business and even the upper management, there's only a select few that might have access to this restricted. It might be, we're acquiring another bank, we're merging, we're selling, we're doing, and only a few folks have that access because of the critical and sensitive nature of it. So anyway, those tools are really wonderful. But anyway, so hopefully that answered that question. As we move forward, this is the one, there's a target on your back. And this is just, when we talk about this, you think about, the threats aren't always obvious. That's for sure. You don't always know what people are looking for. I'll give you an example. We deal with professional sports teams. I can't mention names, but they are referencing someone, but I'm going to leave it general. The point is, it's funny when you go in there because again, I'll do work in a bank, and I know what information's critical and confidential. Easy, right? Face value. I go into a healthcare organization, whether it's a hospital or a doctor's office, and I'm looking for healthcare information, make sure it's protected. When you go to the dentist or the doctor, you see those manila folders with all those little colored tabs. That's important stuff. It's right behind the counter, and usually they got it everywhere, and that always makes my hair crawl. But anyway, protecting that is so important. But in a sports environment, I go in there. And even in a university where I go down to where the athletes are, that the record of their particular health is maintained by their trainers, right? And you think, well, so what? But if you think about a sport at the sports level, a professional athlete, now he's retired, but you look at Tom Brady, or you look at, Aaron Rodgers, you look at some of these great quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, if he had some sort of a serious injury that wasn't public, people are betting big money on these games. His career, his value and trade might be really weighted upon his health, of course. And see, a multi-million-dollar trade could fall through if it leaked out to the press. So this is like gold to them. This is as important as any bank account you can think of. Pretty crazy if you think about it. The next example I find also quite fascinating. This was an actual example. It's from a website. I'm trying to think of the website because it had all kinds of breaches. And I do tip my hat to the creativity of these attacks. This particular one, it was like there was a dumpster. And if you've ever been involved where you're printing invoices or bills, I used to do it at the bank. Printing statements, and if something went screwy, it's offset. I got to reprint these. I'll throw those, or I'll shred them. In the old days, you probably I don't remember now. Probably just dumped them in the old days, but shred it now. But this case, they were bills, and they're like, these are bad or whatever. They just dumped them. And they reprinted them, whatever. Somebody went into the old dumpster dive. This still occurs, trust me. And they grab these things. You go, so what? Pay my bill. That's great. I appreciate that. No, it's not like that. What they did do was they grabbed those bills and they contacted these patients. And they had great information. That's what social engineering, which is the next bullet's all about. I got some good information on these people. I basically build a profile of this particular person. I can tell you when you went to this facility. I can tell you what the services were, whether it was, what kind of doctor it was. Be creative, right? Think of something, but they can read it and say, look, hey, Joe Schmo, on this day you went in there, we're just trying to collect on this payment wasn't made. You owe X amount. You saw Dr. So-and-so, and they're giving you all kind of information. We're just looking for a payment today. You don't have to pay the whole thing, even if you don't get all of them, but you get 10% of them to respond and provide payment card information. Then they're going to run off with that information and utilize it, misuse it. It is too easy. And it came from something as simple as a bill. Are you kidding me? So I always go nuts when I drive down. I live in a rural area myself here in Connecticut. And when you drive down the street and you see all the mailboxes, way away from the house during working hours. And at least now with COVID, a lot of people are home still. But anyway, you look at, because people just haven't gone back. It's hybrid now forever, which is fine. But the point is these mailboxes are on the street. I don't even get out of my car. I drive down, look for the idiot with the flag up, the red flag, the one that says I got a bill here with my bank information in it, my account number, my name, my address. I'm just going to grab that, and I can use that information, build a profile. And then when I feel comfortable, I can make that attack toward compromising information on a particular consumer. It just is sadly far too easy. And there's so many methods between phones and email links that come in for spear phishing and phishing attacks. So you are a target as an employee, and you are a target as a consumer as well. So there's my little break. See, I just took an inhale. If you have any questions, jump in. Otherwise, I'm going to move on.
Questions, you are good to go right now.
All right. So we're going to talk the talk. And what I mean by that is this. I mentioned it earlier. In different industries, we use terminology a lot. In the banking industry, I do like the special dance they have. They are specific about, they've got a board, they've got an audit committee, and they have a 3-year audit plan. There's a little dance there. And I like it because it's organized. And when risks arise, they move to a risk register where they're tracked. It's just a fancy word for really a project plan. You get names, owners, and tasks. But my point is, you look at this stuff and the subject here of sensitive data. Now, if you think about what we've gone through so far, you think that, we now know our business and we know where our information is at rest and in motion, the flow of it. I called it the life cycle, So we also have looked into understanding who governs our business. So now we know what laws, regulations, standards apply to our business. And now we're in a position to look forward to build controls around those. And these controls are the things that will protect that sensitive information, and it also protects our business. So when you put controls in place, you minimize risk. So risk is, there's always residual risk, or rather there's inherent risk with everything we do, right? You get out of bed, there's some inherent risk, right? I could step on the floor and twist an ankle. There's any risk once you get up in the morning throughout your day. There's different levels of risk. Without even thinking, we mitigate those risks by doing certain things to do that. Well, the business world is no different. In this world of protecting sensitive data, we are going to put controls in place. We're going to minimize that risk to reasonable levels. You can never completely get rid of it. And by minimizing risk, we mitigate that risk. That's just a fancy term. You hear it a lot. I've got a risk here. What's the risk level? Oh, it's high. Well, let's mitigate it. How do you mitigate it? You put controls in place. One or more controls, the aggregate of which reduces that risk from a higher level to a more reasonable level. I always give the example of we have to take on risk. We make a business decision to do that. The banking world's a great one for this, because here's the deal. You look at a bank in the morning before they open up, the doors are closed. There's an alarm. There's cameras. We might even have a security guard, and there are a number of controls. But in the morning, they unlock that door. They turn that alarm off. They unlock that door. They enter the facility, right? They move in. Now we go behind the counter and we open that vault. Now the risk is going up. If you graphed it as I'm speaking, it's going up, right? We open that big vault door. We open the cage up. Now each locker has cash drawers, and oh boy, the risk is going through the roof. We grab those cash drawers. We put them out now. Now here's where we look at the controls. Maybe our security guard is there, so that risk is going down a little bit. Maybe we don't have one, but we've got cameras for sure. We've got an alarm at each station called an ambush. Well, that goes down a little bit more. We've got hide counters. That helps a little bit. We've got die packs that are, if someone was to compromise the money or ask for it during a holdup, the die packs explode, things of that nature. After they leave the facilities are easier to trace. So all these controls minimize that risk, reduce that risk to more reasonable levels. Plus, we only have so much in our cash drawers, so they can't completely compromise every aspect of it. But the message is you have to take on some risk to move forward with our business, and we need to put in controls just to make it reasonable to do so, without which we'd be out of business. Now, where do our controls live? They live in our policies. That's why we talk about all of this, right? And people say, well, what's in a policy? Well, we've got a good blog out there on our site. I highly recommend you take a look at it. It's called The Anatomy of a Policy. And essentially what it is you look at what's in a policy real quickly. Pick any policy, doesn't matter. They're all going to have what the objective or purpose of it is, right? What's this policy for? Oh, the purpose of this policy is to address blah, blah, blah. Great. Then the next part of it is, what's the scope of it though, right? Like, hey, well, the scope of it is for all employees and contractors or not. What is the scope? So you clearly define the scope, who it applies to, and then you move through it. And now the most important part of this policy are the policy statements. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the last couple pieces, one of them is enforcement. What if I don't do what it says? Well, and you've all seen this before, right? Oh, it will, this could lead to up to and including termination, blah, blah, blah. Great. We've got some threat in there. That's wonderful. You need to have that. And the last part is, hey, is this a real policy? No, it's not until I have, included authorization or sign off by executive management, upper management. It needs to be reviewed every year. And we need those folks to sign off on that. Now it's a policy. So if I go in and audit your organization and you have the best looking policies, but they either A, haven't been reviewed within a year, or B, they have no review and no sign off, I'm sorry, they're great ideas. They do not, and I'm going to write you up. They don't apply. They're not policies until they are signed off and authorized. So now they're policies. And now I'm going to go back to the most important part of those 5 areas of the anatomy of a policy, and that are control statements. And I say it that way. It's not just, it's a control, but it's a control statement. There are 2 parts to it, and both of them need to be there. For example, I could simply say, I'm going to have a policy that says, you know what, we'll run scans periodically. Who's we? I go in that audit, I go, we, what does that mean? I write up everybody in the bank or the organization. Everybody's guilty. Why? Because it says we. Who is accountable? If I can't find out who's accountable, I need a title, no names. Susie, no names. Sue's not accountable. What's Susie's title? Oh, she's the CTO. Now I have a title, CTO. Why? Because if she leaves the organization and now Bill's in there, it's the CTO. It holds the same value. So always put a title, not a name. Now I know who's accountable. The CTO will run periodic scans. What's periodic? I might ask one of you on this call. Someone might say, oh, that's probably monthly. Someone might say, oh, I think that's quarterly. Someone else say weekly. Yeah, what's periodic? I don't know. So how can I write you up for anything wrong or right? So now we say, with the statement I've underlined here, the proper way is to have a clearly defined ownership, that role, the CTO, got to find it on my org chart or it's not a real role. And then I move over and what is the task? The task or the responsibility is to run an external, in this case, my example, run an external vulnerability scan on all public IP addresses quarterly. Wow, very specific. I know exactly what must be done. I know what I'm going to look for. I know who I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at the CTO and I'm looking for those scans every quarter. Easy, clear. It sounds silly, but it matters. You don't know how many policies I get that are just wonderful bunches of information. Oh, it talks about all kinds of garbage. I'm like, yep, nothing. Who's accountable? This is horrible. Have clearly defined roles and responsibilities and you will do well. As long as you adhere to your laws, that's why it was important. We said, know who governs you, what laws govern your business. And then within that, you go through and then identify these control statements and you're going to do well. All right. So now once we have that clear understanding of where our sensitive data is, we build it. We build these sets of policies, and people go, oh, how many policies? Doesn't matter. It depends on your business. And you can have some that are one big fat. There's no rule that says you have to have 10 policies or 20 or one. You could have one big policy. I don't recommend it because it would be so convoluted and crazy. And also the distribution of it. Not everybody needs to see every policy. Many of the policies are very technically oriented, like the vulnerability management one I'm referring to here, where this statement belongs. And only the folks in IT that do the scanning should have access to this, because it might also have some other information that is confidential, and not everybody in the business needs to see that. So anyway, that's why that's why we recommend you break it down into succinct policies. Even if you pull them all together into a WISP, a written information security program, that's cool. But this breakdown of policies and clarity of them is so important. I said a lot there. Any questions, Nick?
Yes, I have one for you.
Please.
Do you think that physical data theft is more prevalent than electronic data theft?
Not even close. No. The answer is no. Now, the only caveat to that would be depending on your business, but in the industries we deal with mostly, the answer is definitely no. Most of us have moved to an electronic world, even if it's stuff that they deal with hard copy aspects. Typically these things are scanned and indexed and then hard copies are shredded. The other reason for that is, if I do one-off thefts, and this is not just Jerry speaking or my experience, this is statistical data. We attend a lot of conferences for PCI. We're required for so many CPEs and things. This comes up from organizations like, Visa conferences we've gone to, and American Express, and they have a lot of data on these kind of things. And the one-off theft of a card information or other confidential information is very, very low because think about it. If I grab and that's why when you see in the news, 10,000 records were compromised. Now, that came from a database, right? That was a compromise of a database. I break in with one break and I see all that stuff versus physically I'm going through one. Now I got to type it up to even do something with it. I got to translate it back to the electronic world to even compromise something. So it's 100% hands down electronic. Policies in general. So just a couple of things about policies. You hear different terminology, a program versus a policy. It's very simple. A policy is part of a program, right? So a program is the holistic overall umbrella type view, right? Whereas as a policy is part of a program. Procedures that roll up to those policies, those are also part of a program. Training, so education, that's part of that program. Monitoring it, making sure it's still functional because our business changes. And even if our business doesn't change or the technology there, the outside threats are going to be changing. So things are always moving. So a program has all these features in it for a good reason. So that the holistic approach to a security program includes all of those, especially the monitoring ongoing and the testing of it, so that we're assessing constantly, usually recommended that and often required that independent testing. So outside parties are saying it, checking to make sure, this is still working, right? The policy that you have in place is doing well, and I don't see any risks here, or the risks are reasonable. We already covered the anatomy of a policy. Policies are your rules to the game. And one example of that, it's funny because, like the fourth bullet says, we need to align with federal state laws for sure, right? Regardless of the industry you're in, we all have to abide by laws as consumers, as business owners or business, employees. But here's the funny part, and I'll give you the example because this is what resonates most probably. When you look at the policies, and I say they're the rules to the game, I'll give you an exact real example. When we go in and audit organizations, A record retention policy is a fundamental, very important policy to have. It basically says, identifies, we talked about sensitive information. That's what we're talking about here. Well, sensitive data, it will say this sensitive data that we have, here's where it's located, and here's how long we are going to retain it, and whether it's in hard copy or electronic, and most of it's electronic now, but it could have, you might still have some archives in a vault, whatever. But the point is where it is and who's the owner, who's the data owner, and how will it be destroyed? And so you have the duration and such. It's important to have that because also there are laws out there about litigation. If you are entered in and subpoenaed for data, you have to put a freeze on the destruction of data. I don't care if your policy says 3 years. Well, if you're in litigation and you're up to the 3-year mark, put a freeze on that. You're not to destroy that data or you'll be in contempt of court. So there's rules governing and so you have to be kind of careful with electronic methods of destruction. You need the ability to hold it up if you're subpoenaed to maintain information. But the example I was going to give you was, look, say the law says, you need to retain, in PCI, for example, we have to retain our PCI work for 3 years. Wonderful. But what if I said, hey, I'm going to keep it for 5 years and someone was auditing me? And they come in, they find it for 3 years. Oh yeah, they adhered to what was required by the PCI standard. However, your policy said 5 years, and I only found 3. That's a violation. That's a risk. And the reason why it's a risk is this: it's very clear. Why I said here, your policies are the rules to your business, and yes, they must align with the law. And you can be more conservative, but you cannot be less conservative. So in my example, that's why it's a finding. And basically, if that policy is not adhered to, it undermines all of them. Because if I don't believe this one and I proved it doesn't work, what's to say the rest of them I should believe, right? So now it puts all of them into question. So you need your policies. You need to adhere to them. I always say to my clients when we write them and work with them, it's like, you need to be able to commit to this. If it's part of a jugular issue, it needs to be in there. You need to make it work. Some of them are like, you don't really if you're not doing it, don't say it, right? Because if you can't commit to it, when I go in there and audit, I'm going to test these by seeing if you're doing these things. And if you're not, it is a finding, whether it's a violation of the law or it's a violation of your policy. It is a finding. It does present risk. So it's real important note. And I always say it's a do's and don'ts. Every employee gets an acceptable use policy. They need to. If they haven't, you need to get them out, with there. But it basically, in those acceptable use policies, that's where it lives, right? It's the do's and don'ts of my organization. Like, you're allowed to have, you can use your own cell phones or not. You can use USB drives on your company issued computer or not. Maybe we shut it down. I always prefer electronically shutting it down as an admin. But the point is, it tells you what you can do and what you cannot do. It's very clear. And then you're required with these most important policies that protect the business, but protect ultimately that consumer information that the consumers you're serving. That sensitive data is protected by these policies. So these things are so important. That's why when we start off every audit, and I'm sure folks on this call have gone through an audit one way or another, whether you're actively involved or not, the first thing they do is they kick off the audit or the examination, depending on your industry. And they say, okay, I'm going to need to see a lot of evidence. I need to see all these different things. And the first thing we ask for are all your policies and procedures. And that's why. So if you ever had that question, there's the answer to that one. All right, we're doing pretty good on time, about 40 minutes in. Nick told me to go to about 50, 55. So I'm doing pretty good. Now I'm going to cover a few critical policies. Again, this was not intended to be an exhausted list, but these are really important ones, right? When you look at access controls, gosh, this is, many people think just, access to a system, but really it can be physical access too. So when we perform an audit of an organization, we're looking at the physical controls and the logical controls. So people entering sensitive areas of your building, if you still have brick and mortar facilities, and many of my clients have both, if you've got a data center in there or information stored in there that is sensitive data, we need to make sure you have the appropriate physical controls, like the door is locked, there's an alarm, there's a sign-in book, I have a badge, maybe I'm escorted, there are cameras everywhere. These are nice physical controls. And then when I enter specifically during an audit, a sensitive data center area, furthermore, I am signing in again to that room. And the reason for that is if something goes sideways during the time frame to which I was in that room, I'm one of the people that also, along with the people that escorted me, that are on that short list of, hey, this happened during this time frame. Who was in that room? Well, these are the people. The cameras help also to match up the people that physically walked in as you see them walking in, but the sign in is important because you usually have a name, a date, time, who escorted you, and the purpose. The logical side of access controls, again, I'm going to go back to that audit rule, least privileges. We live by that. And I love the example I gave. Again, even if you're the CEO, and I remember way back in the banking days, it was like our CEO was like, hey, I'm the CEO, I need access to everything. No, you don't. And you really don't want it, right? You certain information you don't need to see for your job. There's other information you need to see that we don't need to see, but people need to have access to just their area of a business needed. So there's two sides to access control. You've probably heard it before, this authorization and authentication. Authorizations where it's like, okay, Jerry has a business reason to log into this system where this payment card information resides, maybe. And because that he uses it to do blah, blah, blah for his job. So I am authorized by my superior to do that. And there should be some evidence of that. Maybe it's a ticket, some workflow, someone authorized it. Then I am authenticated physically by a system like, say, Active Directory, where when I log in, I'm authenticated, and then I'll log into the system. But not to leave out towards the bottom here, the most important thing, more and more these days, and highly recommended in all industries, is to use multi-factor authentication. So for those of you that maybe not as technical, it doesn't matter. It's very simple. MFA, you're using it typically, you should be with your bank accounts. If you log in from home and perform even transactions as a consumer, you have, there's three categories. It's what I know. So that's my username and my password, right? What I have, maybe I have a soft token where, I bring up on my phone an authenticator or soft token. Some of them had hard tokens in the old days. More and more they're getting away from them, where it's something on your key, your key ring, where it was like a little RSA token and the number changes every, 30 seconds or whatever. And so that's what that's what I have. And the third thing is what I am. It's biometrics, right? Whether it's, you iPhone users like myself, you look at it and it's like, like facial recognition, retina scans, thumbprint, different what I am things. So those are the three categories. Two of those, pick one from two categories. It's always what I know. Usually every one of these systems are password oriented or passphrase oriented. So it's what I know. Now grab one from either the biometrics category, where it's what I am or what I have, the token. A lot of them use those two. But either way, choose two of those. Statistically, the risk of being compromised goes down dramatically. There was a case recently, for those of you that use different key encryption tools, like LastPass was one that was compromised a little while back. And at first face value, you're like, holy cow, I got everything personal and professional in there. But then if you go, wait a minute, I use MFA, I use multi-factor. So even if you have my username and you have my password, you are not getting in because you do not have my phone or you do not have the soft token that resides. That's a great way. So you go through, by the way, if a system you utilized was compromised, go through, change all of your passwords anyway. Just be safe, change them all anyway. But know that if you're using MFA, that's a great safety net. Very important. Layered security, got to do it. Data encryption, very obvious. I think it's it's required in every industry that we do auto work in, and it makes just common sense, even personally, right? So if I've got information that I'm dealing with as a consumer or business, I want to make sure that it's encrypted. You always hear me say it, encrypted at rest, meaning that data is stored on a laptop or a system. I want to make sure it has AES 256 encryption. It's a certain strength of encryption. And then in motion, maybe I use TLS 1.2 or HTTPS, whatever. The point is, when it's being transmitted, I want it encrypted. And a lot of folks, you have VPN, a virtual private network, where we're using a VPN tunnel where I'm transmitting information through an encrypted tunnel. So it's using these encryption methods at rest and in motion. This is a very detailed discipline, by the way, but it's fascinating. It's changing all the time to keep up with the changing threats that are constant. And then database backup recovery. Talk about sensitive data. Well, we follow the crumb trails, and that is to say, so while I look at your primary system as as being protected at rest and emotion, all that kind of thing, but your backups also need to be, and where are they? Because there's other facets of sensitive data that we care about, the availability of this data to do our business, right? So when you're doing business with a third-party provider, make sure that in your contracts in your service level agreements with them that they have provisions in there for availability. That's the fancy term for it. Just availability. Make sure those systems are available. What is their claim? Oh, if there's downtime, we claim our downtime will be less than 24 hours or 72 hours, blah, blah, blah. So when you're building your business continuity plan, just as a side note, if you've got a vendor that says, in their SLA, 72 hours available. Well, you can't have a plan that says that same system is going to be available in 24 hours because you can't commit to that because your vendor's not committing to that. So you got to make sure that your recovery time objectives in your business continuity plans align properly with all the vendors that are involved. So that's a key point. So last note on the data backups and recovery, again, knowing where they are, the availability to only those parties that need them, the fact that they are encrypted because they are their systems or the backups of systems. And a lot of them are now disk to disk or highly available systems from cloud to cloud. But the point is, in all cases, access to those needs to be restricted and encrypted and protected.
I have another question for you, and I think you kind of hit on part of it, but how do migrations, backups, and disaster recovery strategies factor into where data resides in the organization?
Okay, so when the last two are quite related, migration is many things, right? So I migrate data when I'm moving from one system to another. It's often during a conversion or such, but in all cases, a migration plan would be developed for that or strategy so that where the data starts from to where it's moving during the motion of the moving, it's encrypted, ensuring that, as well as where it resides at rest. So making sure that we're during your planning of it before it's executed, that you account for the encryption at rest and in motion during that migration. The last two were the backups and would you say the restoration? And those two, Nick and whoever asked the question, those two are quite related, right? So those are facets of your business continuity plan. So when you're going through your business impact analysis, you're identifying all your critical functions, where they reside, where they're backed up, things like that, and you put together strategies. And those strategies include considerations, obviously, for cost, but security always, right? If it's sensitive data that we're talking about, so where it is here, but during my backup and also restoration planning, I need to make sure that it's available, and then I test it to make sure I can meet my time frame or my goal that I tell my customer. My recovery time objective to my customer might be 1 day or whatever, whatever the example is. But it's all about the planning is the answer. The short answer for all three of those. You're going to plan those out. You're going to map out the full plan to include all facets of how it's going to be carried out procedurally, right? Think of people, process, technology. So who's doing it, when and where? We map out the plan for a migration or for data recovery and retention, restoration. And then making sure that it's also protected while it's there at rest. It moves over, whether it's de-encrypted at any point, making sure that only those people with business reasons have access to it, and then until it's restored and back up again. So that's a big piece of your business impact analysis as you move in through your business continuity plan development. There's a lot to that, and that's kind of actually the short answer, believe it or not. And I'd love to have more dialogue on that. We did a lot. I have a BCM also blog I wrote a while back on that subject when it first came out. It's pretty fascinating. There's a lot to it. All right, so we're doing okay. I think we got about five or 10 more minutes here. Data retention policies. I mentioned this earlier. By the way, can you still hear me good, Nick?
Yes, I can hear you perfect.
Great. Thank you. Data retention policies, real important. If you remember one of the earlier slides when we talked about, the life cycle of information, the retention is important. It's also contractually involved in not only legally for different industries by federal and state laws governing information, like I mentioned earlier, but also contractually, you may be under contract with a client, depending on what your business is, that, they say, hey, retain this for me for X period of time. So you need to have policies. And what these retention policies will say is this: they'll clearly articulate the secure methods to which you will retain data, right? So at rest, it will be retained in these safe, secure ways to adhere to our service level agreements to serve our clients, and nothing general. We know what needs to be in a policy statement: a clear owner, that the title that lives on an org chart, and a clear responsibility. So we know exactly what that responsibility, the task, that responsibility is as it relates to particular data on this retention, in this retention policy. Now, I mentioned policy, but really there's another piece to it, right? There's a procedure too that rolls up to it, tells you how you do it. But the policy, the retention policy itself, there's a third piece in this case because it's a specialized one, and it's typically what we call a schedule, a retention schedule. Now, some people build it into the policy, but the policy, think of it as quite static. It's going to get reviewed once a year, and then it sits on the shelf typically. And even when it's reviewed, there's not usually a lot of changes made to the policy because remember, it just says where and how it's stored at rest, in motion to be retained. And then, the procedure says how you do it. And that's quite static as well. But the schedule might be a little bit more dynamic. And that's why it's broken out often. So you can change it without needing, an act of Congress to sign off on it throughout the year. Items can come on and come off that list. For example, if we added a new data type that included sensitive data that needed to be retained, then that I would add that to my schedule. It still has to adhere to the policy, but it would be like, here's the data owner, here's where it's stored, here's the retention period, here's the data owner, and then our policy says how it's secured and whatever. And the cousin of the data retention is the data destruction policy. Some people combine them, not a big deal either way, but you have to expand it if you do combine them to include the secure methods of destruction, whether they're completely automated, if it's electronic only. Some people do have hard copies of certain things, in which case you need to have a cross-cut shredder, Department of Defense approved, DoD approved cross-cut shredder, or some folks have bonded, which is the better way, in my opinion. A bonded, insured shredding company. Shred It is one of the big ones. There's a lot of them out there, but they literally come on site and they'll shred documents and hard drives. They'll shred all data and content, and they'll give you a certificate. They're insured, so it's protected. So are you. And then you move forward with the other two areas on here as time is kind of running out, but we did answer our questions along the way. So I'm going to keep going. Data privacy. Look, privacy policies more and more are clearly a requirement. You saw the laws. GDPR is an international one that protects the consumers in the European Union, but we've got state privacy laws all over. One of the bigger ones in our area, New England, popped up, and while all states have it, New York was a big one, and it's evolving all the time and becoming more stringent. But Massachusetts had Mass 201 CMR 17, which is a state privacy law, and basically again was just protecting the consumers. And it's the state. For example, my business is in North Providence, Rhode Island, but I'm serving consumers and customers all over, actually in several countries, but all over the United States for sure. And the consumer that lives in Alaska is protected by their privacy laws in the state of Alaska. Doesn't just because of my business is in Rhode Island, it's where you live, and as a consumer of that state, you're protected by those state laws. There are federal ones that govern all, but anyway, that just kind of puts it in perspective. But you'll see, and you saw more and more recently, like with California Consumer Privacy Act, and there's revisions of that. They're all in a sense very similar. It basically says, like, mostly on electronic methods where I log into a website and you always see that you have to accept the cookies or not. And basically that's information on you that they want to kind of capture. They're usually using it to sell you more things, and certain information is needed to navigate the site, but other information could be used, in different ways. So you got to read those to make sure that you understand how they're using your data. You do have laws now that protect you, so you can literally say, I'm going to opt out, and they need to have a way of deleting and removing that information. But the beauty of the policy requirement is it literally will articulate, if you did it right, it'll describe clearly the kind of personal data that's being captured by your site, and you'll describe not only that, but how you're using it, the limits of it, and who you share it with if you do or do not. And then you as a consumer or you as a business make a decision, do I want to embark in this or not? So read them, don't just click yes. And then moving over to the last aspect, we talked about it earlier, it's training. I mean, employee training is critical. There's training in so many different areas, but overall security awareness training should include your sensitive data, should include the way your business runs. So like I say, my training that I build for professional sports team, it's geared toward them and towards athletes, healthcare information and that kind of content, and playbooks as well. That's another target, if you will, of a professional sports team. But then when I deal with another industry that's just dealing with payment card information, or a bank that's dealing with financial information, at the end of the day, training their employees on on that information, where it lives, and where it shouldn't live, right? And how to handle it to make sure it's always, again, at rest and protected at rest and in motion. And again, that you're adhering to those policies, not just, the privacy, the retention. There's so many policies that come into play, but the protection of the information is ultimately the most important part of it. And you can make your employees your strongest asset by training them properly and rewarding them, support them all the way through. Management has to support them. Bringing it home, summarizing, the key is know where your sensitive data is. I think we're all clear on that now, and know the life cycle of it, right? How long am I supposed to retain it for? Where it's going to flow? The whole 9 yards with that. Because a lot of when we do that, when we perform audits for our clients, we ask for network diagrams, because there's only really 2 domains or dimensions that we deal with, right? We deal with physically, so what places in your building might sensitive data reside. So you could have a layout literally of your organization, and you put a little red mark everywhere, sensitive data, maybe in a cabinet or a locked vault or closet. And then you look at your network, which is the other dimension, really, right? So logically, so I look at network diagrams. I'm like, okay, what servers or systems have it? Okay, let's take a red marker and flow the data coming in from the outside world or throughout the intranet inside your world. Just flow it all around. Every segment that was touched is in scope. Every segment that was touched has sensitive information and therefore could be a target. So we need to put controls in our policies to protect all those facets, both physically in the physical world relative to locations in your building, and the logical world relative to network diagrams and the systems that reside among those different network subnets. Know the laws and regulations that govern your business. Obviously very important as a consumer, but also obviously as a business, right? Just know who governs you, what's required. And don't worry, they're going to be checking on you as well. So you better know who's governing you and be prepared for it. Be ahead of the game. Don't just, it's funny because again, we deal with so many industries and different aspects of it. And people, there's a big difference between compliance. I can be compliant to a law, regulation, standard, guideline. And there's a difference between being compliant and being secure, because I can hit the bare minimum. I meet the minimum, I'm compliant. But am I as secure as I could be, should be? I'd rather be secure. If I really focus on security and protecting that sensitive data for my business, if I do that, then I look over at the compliance list, I've already met those. So focus on security. Yeah, you got to meet the requirements of the laws and everything. Sure, do that. Make sure you're doing that. But if you really have a high focus on the security of it, and you better, because it's real. The attacks that you see and we get brought in all over the place. It is eye-opening. And I don't mean to scare you, but it's real, where organizations that are dealing with. We talked about data classification a little bit earlier. I gave you the 4 levels. We were brought into a client we're dealing with, and they were compromised. Ransomware it was, and their server was locked up, encrypted. And we had our cybersecurity group come in, identify, started working with it. They went on the dark web, identified what kind of attack it was, who it was, and I asked them. I said, "Hey, did you classify the system?" I know they had the policies. I wrote them. They didn't classify them, but they're like, "Oh, we have a policy. We don't pay anybody." And they thought that was, they were kind of proud about that until they realized that, without paying, all of a sudden, my cyber team came and presented them an Excel spreadsheet that was posted on the dark web of all of their client information. This particular client, this is 2 years ago, and they were international. So they had all kinds of nightmares, laws and cost. And I mean, it was international. It was horrible. And I guarantee you they don't have that same stance today. So take it seriously and make sure your security program is solid. Know the laws that apply to you. And as I move through this stuff, that program, the policy, the governance, the people, the process, technologies of your business, make sure they all are familiar with the policies and understand what's expected of them. But training your staff is paramount, right? Knowing what they are, what each person's responsible for, what their role is so important. Because believe me, the bad actors are constantly trying to attack, trying to break in. Our business is based on the fact that technology is moving forward very fast, and that that someone's always trying to break in to compromise information. That's just a fact. Then laws come out in response to it to protect consumers and businesses, and those laws require businesses to do certain things, to have scans and tests and audits and all these things. That's why they're required, because there are bad actors out there, and it's real. So monitoring and testing, the last aspect of this. So after training is to monitor, make sure that everything in our program, our security program, the policies and the procedures and the training, the ongoing, we're monitoring it to make sure nothing's changed, and maybe some things aren't as good as they could be. We shore those up, we adjust those accordingly. And in conclusion, kind of looking at this stuff, it's knowing where your sensitive data resides and implementing critical controls such as access control, data encryption, data backup and recovery, data retention policies, DLP solutions, employee training. These are all essential aspects. And I really should have even had data classification in here too, because I find that one to be, quite important, not only because of the examples I just gave you, but it is one that kind of is pervasive throughout the organization. So these are essential into protecting your organization. It really is it's the consumers you serve that we're protecting, but it ultimately obviously protects your business against these kinds of attacks that you're definitely subject to every day. This brings us to closure. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one question on deck, and I want to remind everybody that you can ask any questions. This is your last chance here to ask questions. The last question I have right now is, what are the impacts of cloud technology and off-premises data storage on data location within an organization?
Yeah, so depending on your industry, there's a few considerations here. Number one, some parties that you do business with, depending on your industry, right? They want US-based data centers only. So that's one consideration. Cloud solutions do have a physical footprint somewhere. It's not literally cloud. So these cloud solutions like Azure, AWS, Google, these are phenomenal for lots of reasons. One reason is the protection they have and the independent audits that are constantly occurring, like a SOC 2 Type 2, like a PCI report on compliance audit. These organizations are, I'm not going to say they're bulletproof, but they are constantly being audited. These controls are being tested regularly on your behalf, not just for the physical controls to the facility, but the logical access and controls within them. And I tell you what, so that's one great reason why they're wonderful solutions. But I came from the old world. I did turn my camera up, and if you were on early, you saw, got a little bit of gray hair here. It's actually some way to say it's white. But anyway, the point is, way back when it wasn't that, we had everything on-prem, right? I worked at a bank, credit union. Actually, we had servers and systems there physically, and that meant when we had to do, if something went down, we had to grab physical tapes and go to a hot site, another data site, and spin up tapes and restore systems. It took forever. With these wonderful cloud solutions, you don't need to put your business physically at such risk. The building itself can, in many audits that we do, are completely out of scope now. Everything's in the cloud. There's only a few people that are acting on it that have access to it, but it's safely in the cloud. Now we get independent audit reports from them. There are definitely a bunch of tests we still need to do, but it ultimately, when you look at that piece, availability, that availability aspect of the third-party relationship you have with these vendors is being addressed by them. It doesn't mean that you don't have to consider it, but you need to, the big thing is to look at what their commitment is to the availability, right? They'll say within 24 hours or blah, blah, blah. And a lot of them the cloud solutions are all highly available in the sense that they have multiple United States based alternative data centers, West Coast, East Coast. So they, if one blows up, they literally are up at another one. So there are a lot of things, but cloud solutions are phenomenal. Just do your homework. What's the best solution for you? They offer all great facets like log management, just a number of, they have hands in the cage. So if you need them to do certain things for you, they can do patching for you. There are a lot of really wonderful features and functions. Just price it out, because quickly the price can go up, but weigh what you're getting and the value of that when you consider what your business is, and that certain systems need to be available when they're available, when your clients expect them. So this is huge, and it's a wonderful option for people.